Hey everyone! This packet is all about seeing what you can create at home. You can use everyday objects to create awesome things and learn a little bit about what scientists and engineers do. Today we're going to engineer a boat. Have you ever wondered how sometimes a heavy object can float in water? When a person steps into water, they sink. But if that same person gets into a big boat, the whole thing floats. So how can a heavy boat float, even though the person who weighs a lot less sinks? The answer is buoyancy. Buoyancy has to do with the force of two things pushing against each other. Usually, the force of gravity pushes everything towards the ground. That's why when you take a penny and you drop it, it sinks all the way to the bottom of the water. But sometimes when the force of something else pushes against the gravity, the force can keep it from falling immediately to the ground. Think about the wind, how a leaf can float through the wind without falling directly to the ground. Or have you ever held a feather in front of or on top of a fan and see how it sometimes either slowly floats down or even can hang in the air for a little bit? The force of the gravity, in that case, is equal to the force of the wind that's pushing against it. When an object is in water, the water also pushes against it, just like the wind. So, in order for an object to be buoyant, you have to make sure that the force of the water that pushes against it is equal to the force of the gravity that pushes down. So, how do you make sure that those two things are equal? Well, there's multiple different ways to do this. One is to spread it out and make sure that there's lots of surface area. That way, there's more water to push against it, and so the force is greater. Another way is to create an air pocket. Think about how a balloon floats in water, or if you fill it with the right substance, can even float in air. This is how things like buoys work. Have you ever seen a buoy in the water out on the dock? It's hollow on the inside and filled with air, so it works kind of like a balloon. That's what keeps it floating in water. Buoy and buoyant both come from the same word. That's why they're spelled similar. So, today we're going to see if we can make something that's buoyant enough to hold pennies and not sink. So even though we saw that one penny sinks to the bottom of the water, we're going to try to make our own boat that can float many pennies without sinking. We got to remember the principles of force and buoyancy to make sure that we can make this work. So, in your packet, you should have a piece of tinfoil. This is what you're going to use to make your boat. So remember, in order to spread out the force of the water, you have to try to make the boat big. So you don't want to crumple it into a small little ball. You want to try to make a boat without making it too small. So there's different ways to do this, but you can kind of fold your foil in and fold it against each other however you want, and try to make a boat shape. There's many different ways to do this. I'm just making a really simple one right now, but you can experiment with different ones at home. You have one piece of foil in your packet, but if you have more foil at home, you can try this many times. Or you can even look and see if you have other objects that you can try this with too, instead of foil. Okay, so once I have my boat, I'm going to test to see if it floats in the water. Remember, the gravity pulls the boat towards the ground, but the force of the water pushes the boat towards the air. So you want the two forces to be equal in order for the boat to float. So now you're going to test it. You can take any object, but pennies work really well. You're going to see how many pennies you can put in the boat while it still floats. Remember, if a penny goes straight into the water, it sinks to the bottom. But if you put it in the boat, it floats. So even though the gravity is pulling the boat towards the bottom, and the weight of the pennies adds to that, the force of the water pushing against it keeps the boat from sinking, and instead, it floats on top of the water. That's called buoyancy. Now, eventually, if we keep adding pennies, the force of the gravity will be greater than the force of the water. So, at home, you can try to see how many pennies you can add before it sinks. Keep track and count. And if you make a second boat, or if somebody else in your family makes a boat, you can see which boat holds the most pennies before sinking. If you haven't gotten your packet yet, make sure that you stop by the library to get your supplies. And join us for our next video where we're going to make a zip line that you can do in your house. Happy reading!